Well, just the holiday season, so we're moving Linda Moulton Howe up a little bit. She'll be on in just a moment with a number of stories of fascinating interest, including what is going on over the ocean skies near Florida. That'll be your first report when we come back in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. We've got Linda Moulton Howe now tonight, full program with her. First story, something's going on near Naples, Florida. Linda, what is it?
Well, you remember last month in November on Coast and at my news website, earthfiles.com, I interviewed retired school administrator Ann Hall, who lives in the Isles of Capri in Florida. And she and her husband and neighbors watch what Ann calls an extraordinary-looking aerial gyroscope because it has spinning lights horizontally and vertically. And this was near their homes on May 26 this year. Well, Anne even did a detailed illustration of what she was seeing through binoculars, and that has really provoked a lot of people around the entire world. After that broadcast, I was able also to interview both the Naples fire chief and Naples police officer about other mysterious aerial lights that happened in both September and November. Tonight, I'm going to start with September 14th at 8:30 p.m.
Okay.
That's when the Naples Police and Fire Rescue Communications Center began to receive the first of many 911 calls from people who were reporting, quote, strange orange lights being shot up from the surface of the ocean into the sky and flashing on and off, close quote, right off of the shores of Naples. And at first, callers believed that a boat was in distress and that the orange lights were flares. But here now is the man in charge of the Naples Fire Department, Fire Chief Steve McInerney, who decided to go down to the beach to see for himself.
Okay.
Our communications center here in the city of Naples started to receive the first of many 911 callers that were reporting what they described as flares being shot up from the surface of the ocean up into the sky. So the initial impression from the callers were that what they believed was a boat in distress. We responded our fireboat from the city dock to head out into the ocean and see if, in fact, we have a boat in distress. And another caller says it's approximately 2 to 3 miles offshore, approximately 8 lights. Another caller said 7 lights. And we are getting calls up and down the coast. Then we have 2 police officers radioing in that they believe that the lights seem to be stationary, and they do not appear to be flares. So I immediately departed the house and started to respond. And I went to 5th Avenue South. It's a beach access located in the heart of downtown Naples. And when I went to that location, I had a digital camera. I also had a video camera. But I was kind of impaired because it was so dark. We don't run the lights because of turtles. So there's no street lighting. So it was very, very dark. But when I came up the steps to the beach access, I was surprised to see a bunch of people there in the dark. I could see that there were people there because I could hear them, but they also had cameras and cell phones that were up in front of their faces pointing out towards the water. And then as I walked closer, I could see, I guess the easiest description is it looked like the size of a Ferris wheel. When I observed it, it was 7 lights, more or less in a circular formation, but it would change from a circular toward an octagon shape. It kept moving in shape, basically stayed in the same location, but it would just change shape. And all the lights were more or less symmetrical. One wasn't brighter than the other. There was no smoke that I could see being given off. They were just kind of an eerie orange glow. I was just like kind of mesmerized at looking at it because it was so big, so symmetrical, and breathtaking to see it. I did some videotape, I took some pictures, and I decided to leave that 5th Avenue South location and drive further south, approximately 8 blocks or so, to the city pier, because it's a very lengthy pier. I don't know, it's probably a couple hundred yards in length where I could really get out into the water and see the lights. So I went right down to the pier. It had changed shape. It was in a triangle formation now. And I was really surprised to see so many people on the pier videotaping with phones, cameras, and there was somewhere around 50 people on this pier, all looking south and west. So the object was definitely south and west of the pier out into the Gulf of Mexico.
Right.
I would guess it was probably somewhere in that 5-mile range. And the next day, the Naples News did a pretty thorough investigation, and they talked to military bases, Air Force bases on the Florida West Coast, and also Homestead Air Force Reserve Base. And everyone on the West Coast said they weren't doing any drills. Homestead Air Force Base said they were conducting a NORAD drill earlier in the day, on that same day, the 14th.
But not 8:30 in the night onward.
Well, they didn't give a specific time. They just said they were conducting drills and that they were dropping flares from F-16s. Now, I can tell you that I've seen lots of military aircraft in my life. I didn't see any planes. I didn't see any afterburners. I didn't hear any jet engine noise. There was nothing in the sky here. Now, the Naples Daily News had video that was shot. They sent it to the press affairs officer at Homestead Air Force Base. And then they said, well, flares couldn't do that when they looked at the video. So I don't believe it was military related. I believe that initially when people saw it, they saw it in the triangle shape. It went to the circular and then to an octagon, then back to a triangle, and then it went out. More often than not, you would see 2 simultaneous lights come back on, and maybe a third one either off to the left or to the right of that one, and then those lights would blink off, and then they would reappear on the north side of the pier, which basically the event had been taking place on the south side of the pier and to the west of the pier. And that went on till about 9:45 p.m. because I stood on the pier and watched the lights with a lot of different people. About 9:45 p.m., then it all ceased, and there were no more lights. I had sent you a picture of one light above and one light below with a reflection in the water. I watched those 2 lights in a horizontal shape turn to a vertical, one below the other, and then the light plummeted at a fast rate just above the water. Whether it was 10 feet, 15 feet, 20 feet, I'm not quite sure. But what I am sure of, it hovered above the water for about 30 seconds, then it shot back up into the sky, and then went from a vertical configuration to a horizontal, and then they blinked out.
And that is not anything that any flares can do.
I don't believe so. And the one very strange occurrence on the pier was that when those lights were being seen on the south side of the pier, south and west, there were approximately 8 dolphins were excited, and they were jumping out of the water, and they were squawking, and they were traveling north to go the opposite direction from the lights, which were on the south side of the pier. The dolphins very excitedly were jumping, breaking out of the water, and going north. They went underneath the pier. They were jumping, breaking the water, and all going north. I've never seen a group or a pod of dolphins together like that, all breaking water within seconds of each other and all traveling north very, very quickly and excitedly.
And from your perspective, it sounds as if you were watching agitated dolphins, not dolphins that were playing.
Correct. I think agitated would be a good word, and that caught the attention of the people that were on the pier. A lot of people, oh, my God, look at this, and everyone was looking over the edge, and you're seeing the lights in the sky and the dolphins breaking water and heading north. It certainly has been persistent activity with a lot of different people from a lot of different backgrounds that are seeing the phenomena, the objects, the lights. There's the 2 issues. There's the lights, and then there is the gyroscopic object.
That strange aerial gyroscope showed up again near Naples 7 weeks later on November 9th, 2010. The Naples, Florida police dispatcher received a 911 call at 3:26 a.m. from a Naples resident who wanted to know what a bright white light was over the Gulf not far from her 5-story condo. The woman said she had a telescope focused on the light, had seen it the previous 2 nights, and she was becoming alarmed. Naples Police Dispatch sent a police unit to investigate, but down at the beach level, the officers could not see the light that was south of Naples, possibly over the Isles of Capri and Marco Island about 10 miles south. Another Naples police unit heard the radio call and drove to another location further south and walked out onto the beach. But Officer John D. Donato said he and his patrol colleague could not see any light there either. Officer D. Donato grew up in Philadelphia and was a police officer there for 22 years between 1981 and 2003. He joined the Naples police force in 2007. He figured he and the other officer could not see the light because they were too low on the ground. So Officer Di Donato called Naples Dispatch and asked them to patch the woman through to his cell phone. When the call did come, he asked the woman if she still saw the light from her 5th-floor condo. She said yes and asked the police to go to her condo so they could see for themselves.
We arrived at her condo. We looked in the telescope. You didn't have to look in the telescope. You could see it plain as day.
What were you seeing with your own eyes?
It was a bright white light, kind of like balloon shaped. It looked like the size of a 747, just sitting there. That's how big it looked. And it was glowing. It was white, but it had colors of red, yellow, and green flashing inside of it, not on the outside. It was really something else to see.
When you looked at it through the telescope, what did you see?
The same thing, but just up closer. You could really see the spectrum of the lights were unbelievable.
When you have talked with your fellow officers who have seen this through the binoculars, what do you speculate about?
Well, we're all pretty much saying the same thing. We don't know what it is. It's definitely there, and it should be. We just can figure out what it was.
And when people say we must be dealing with some kind of intelligence from outer space, do you think that is feasible in the context of these gyroscopic-looking objects?
I have to say yes. I've never seen anything like this. That light stayed there until daybreak. It was there until around 6:30 in the morning. And then we didn't see it take off. We didn't see it float away. It was gone.
Jeez. Fascinated, Linda.
Yes, it really is. And I have screened about half a dozen of the videotapes that were taken that night of September 14th down on the piers. And the very interesting thing to me is when Fire Chief McInerney was himself there and he was seeing these 2 orange lights, one that was above the other. And there's some of the video that also shows that the lights do go horizontal and then back vertical. Those 2 lights stay as if they were somehow had something in between that keeps them absolutely hooked together. And they move very quickly. They go up, they go down, they go sideways. I've never seen anything quite like it on any of the many videotapes I have screened in my career of unusual lights. And when you hear the fire chief who was standing there say that he watched with his own eyes as these 2 lights stayed right together, going down toward the water and then going high up in the air, that alone, George, cannot be in the category of flares. And then you reinforce that with the investigation at Homestead that the video was taken from the local media to one of their public information officers. And when they looked at the video, it would be the same video that I've screened at least 6 of them. You know, no matter what the government or military or any authority wants to keep the media and the public believing that flares are responsible for all these incredible events. This is one, September 14th. It went on for more than an hour, with all of these people there taking videotape and photographs, with the fire chief there, with police there for over an hour. And everybody that I've talked to and the fire chief reinforces that the idea that Homestead would try to just brush it all off as flares doesn't make any sense when if they had some kind of a drill, it was not at that time of night because not a single person heard a jet. No one saw smoke. There was none of what would be associated with flares, and it reminds me of what the government authorities tried to convince everyone that March 13th, 1997 in Phoenix was flares. Remember that? Yes. And yet there were eyewitnesses seeing many who saw 2-mile-long craft then. And so in a funny way, it's become like the modern-day weather balloon flares. And in this case, the fire chief and the police officers would say that doesn't hold up. And then on top of all of that, after I reported the Naples and the Isles of Capri phenomena, which included the strange aerial gyroscope, and then a lot of the strange shape-shifting colored lights, I received so many emails about Ann Hall's sketch of what she was looking at through binoculars, and that was where colored lights were spinning horizontally and white lights were spinning vertically. Well, I got 2 incredible emails, one from an eyewitness who was on a road along the Mediterranean Sea in Tunisia when one of these things came toward their taxi, and another eyewitness was on the Japanese coast. And we're going to hear both of those amazing accounts in the fourth half hour tonight.
Why do they seem to be off of ocean waters, Linda? Something's weird there, huh?
Well, it's a good question, George, and it raises that issue that we constantly have heard through Fortean mysteries. Do we have some kind of other intelligence underground, under oceans and seas, or at the bottoms of oceans and seas? That is, to me, a very good question to keep asking in this phenomena. And before we hear their amazing encounters, I thought it would be very valuable at this earlier part of Coast for everyone to hear a retired TV and radio broadcast engineer who worked on media events for an American president during his career. And he heard my November interview with the Texas nurse about her face-to-face encounter with a non-human at her Dallas, Texas home.
That's with the lizard skin being, right?
That's right,
yeah.
Exactly. And the nurse compared the alien skin that she was looking at to rough tree bark, and that got a lot of people's attention. It really surprised me. And this engineer emailed his shock that anyone else was describing a similar entity to one that he encountered in his backyard in 1977. And George, wait until you hear this remarkable, conscious, face-to-face encounter in a broadcast engineer's backyard.
Man, I give you credit, Linda. You find these incredible stories, and you go right for it, and you get some phenomenal testimony from these people.
And to me, it's all adding up to there is a weight out there. There is a gigantic weight of eyewitnesses who know that when I bring people on Coast and at Earth Files, and they are telling their stories with or without their names, all of these hundreds of people who email, that they are being encouraged to finally talk.
Absolutely. Stay with us. More with Linda Moulton Howe in just a moment on Coast to Coast AM. And, of course, our special guest tonight, Linda Moulton Howe. Final hour of the program tonight, we'll have conversations with Linda. That's where you ask her questions. And in many cases, she's gotten some incredible stories from Coast to Coast listeners. We'll be back in a moment with her as we talk about lizard-skinned beings next on Coast to Coast AM. Linda, you all ready for Christmas?
Well, I'm getting there, and tonight in Albuquerque, it has been snowing, the first snow of the season so far, and we really need snowpack for water, so it's nice. But tomorrow, the sun is supposed to be out and the sky blue again.
Well, we've been hit with rough weather here in the Midwest. I'm going back to L.A. in a few weeks, but we had an ice storm last night, and after the show and I went home, I was getting out of my car, and I did a flip, and I went flying, Linda. I mean flying.
Are you okay?
Yeah, but I left some bruises on my elbow and bounced on my hip, but I'm all right. But I heard yesterday and then today, half the city of St. Louis fell. People were falling all over the place.
It was one of those fast freezes.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe in January you can check in and see if there's anything worthy of what's going on with the weather these days.
There really is a lot, and it's erratic. And I am planning to do a story with the NASA solar physicist also about the sun. And what I'll try to do is combine the two in a report.
Okay, that'll be great. Now, lizard people, huh? What's going on here?
Well, in addition to the southern Florida light phenomena, back in November for Coast and Earth Files, I also had an interview with that Texas nurse who asked to remain anonymous, but who said she and her husband had encountered both a chartreuse green light that she sketched in her illustrations and a non-human entity right there at their bedroom window that she compared the skin that she was looking at, she said 8 inches from her face on the other side of the window, as looking like tree bark. And after that broadcast, I received, within hours of the broadcast, came an email entitled, "The Texas Nurse Had My Experience. Greetings, Linda. I'm now 57 years old. Normally, I would never tell anyone about this, but the beings that nurse described are the ones I had an experience with in 1977. I'm telling you this because it's the first time I have ever heard an accurate description of greenish skin-like tree bark from anyone. There is more to the story of my encounter with these little," and he used a cuss word. I followed up with an email reply asking if I could talk with him by phone. And on November 30th, he agreed that I could record an interview for Earth Files and for Coast, provided that I not disclose his real name or location. So I call him Mr. Jones, who was born and raised in Pasadena, California. After high school, he began undergraduate college work, but dropped out to raise his young son after a troubled marriage ended. After working in construction for some time, he returned to school, and in the early 1980s, he began working as a TV and radio broadcast engineer until his retirement in 2008. During his career, he did work on broadcast assignments with an American president. And back in 1977, at age 24, Mr. Jones was renting a house to raise his then 5-year-old son. That year, his young son went through a period where he woke up at night screaming. Mr. Jones would run to his son, who always said to his father, quote, "There's a man standing in the corner," close quote. Even more strangely, his son would also say that someone was, quote, "reaching through the wall towards him," close quote. Then one night, after going to bed, Mr. Jones thought he must be dreaming when he awoke floating in the air. Here now is former broadcast engineer Mr. Jones.
When the incident began, and this is really weird, I found myself floating up out of the bed, across the room, through the wall of the house, out into the driveway, because I could feel the cold outside. I could feel my bare feet on the asphalt of the driveway. And as I stood there, I looked down the driveway towards the back of the house, and I saw a glowing coming out from behind the house, which looked really strange. There was no lights out there, no back porch lights or anything.
Color?
The color was white with a slight greenish tinge to it. And it was about 4 feet off the ground, but it was behind the corner of the house, so I couldn't see exactly what was causing it. So at this point, I began creeping down the wall of the house towards the light because I wanted to check it out. It was closer to my son's room, and I wanted to see what was going on. So I crept down the house and got close to it towards the corner, and then paused for a minute, and then looked around the corner of the house and looked down to see what it was. As soon as I looked around the corner of the house, I got the biggest surprise of my life. I see this little clear dome and these 2 short little beings sitting in it. And as soon as I made eye contact with them, It felt like I had just grabbed an electric circuit. I remember hearing the sound of my teeth clamping together and my body stiffening out, and I couldn't move, just as if I had my hand on some voltage. And I was looking at them, and I remember thinking how surprised I was at how ugly and evil-looking these things were. They were both sitting side by side in this small domed enclosure looking up at me. And as soon as I made eye contact with them, that's when I froze and I couldn't move. Their skin was a dark greenish, I believe. Their eyes were round, but very, very dark. Nothing I could see in the eyes as far as pupils or anything, just like black holes. Their noses were very flat against their face, two small nasal openings, and they had very small mouths. They were very slender. They had suits on. I could only see them down to the waist because they were sitting in this thing, and I couldn't see below their waist. What they were sitting in, I could not see through from about the waist down.
Color of their garments?
It was dark. I think they were black.
Could you see any patches or symbols?
No.
And how far do you think you were standing from them in this object?
Oh, I was 1 or 2 feet from them, very close, because when I looked around the back corner of the house, they were right there around the corner.
And from that close-up distance, you're describing both had skin that looked like tree bark because there were ruts in the surface of their faces.
Right. It was very rough skin, almost like you would see on a lizard. Their skin was a dark green, but the light was a whitish, very light green coming from what they were sitting in.
We're talking about a dark avocado skin green on the skin of the entities, but they are sitting in an object that is glowing white and has green in the white. I was curious what color the green in the glowing light would be like.
Probably not quite as dark as the inside of a lime.
Okay, so back to that kind of neon green that the Texas nurse was describing.
I guess so.
That was the very first thing that she and her husband saw coming through the window into their bedroom was neon green light.
That's the color I saw when I was out in the driveway initially, but later on in this episode, I saw it again through my window, and that was the color, a little lighter than the inside of a lime.
Okay, that's a good comparison. And so we're talking about chartreuse and white light glowing from this very small craft that is in your backyard, and inside are two entities in dark clothing with skin that is about the color of the outside of dark green on an avocado, and that all of the dark green skin, the face, the top of the head, and down to the neck, was heavily marked as one would see in a very severe case of acne.
That's correct.
What happens next? You are standing there. You can't move your head. You can't take your eyes off of their eyes, and you are sensing both anger and danger?
Yes. And at this point, my anger started building. I was thinking, these two small things, they've got too much power over me. The thoughts in my head were going so fast. It's like one of these experiences where you see your life flash before you, because the thoughts were going at such an accelerated rate. I remember thinking things like, you can't do this to me. I'm going to show you. I started getting angry, and at that point I knew my problem was I couldn't break eye contact with them. I was trying to turn my head, but I couldn't move. I felt powerlessness. I felt surprised that I was so powerless. I was almost shocked that these things could cause me to stiffen up and paralyze like that, and I couldn't move. So it was a mix of surprise of the power they had over me, that I couldn't break eye contact with them, and anger that they could do something like that. And one of those fast thoughts running through my head was my son on the other side of the wall in the bedroom, so I started getting angrier and angrier. So at this point, I had a thought in my head, I'm going to show you who's boss. And I started staring him down. And my thought was, I'm going to do to you what you're doing to me, even though I didn't know if I could do it or not. So that seemed to give me some strength. I'm thinking, what I need to do is break eye contact with him. And I remember taking my right foot and just getting up enough strength to move it backwards to try and pull me back enough around the corner again where I would break eye contact with him, because I felt if I could break eye contact, I could act, because then I would have my body back. So that's what I did. I was able to pull back just enough where I broke eye contact with him. And as soon as I broke eye contact, I felt myself flying back down the driveway, right through the wall, and right into the bed. And I hit the bed with such force that it hit up against the wall. I could feel the bed going way down, bouncing me up again. And then I bolted up in the bed. I'm thinking to myself, was this a dream or did this really happen? And I could feel my skin and my clothes were still cold from being outside. The hair was still standing up on my arms. The bed was still rocking a little bit. And then I looked up at the window, which had a semi-transparent shade pulled down, and I could still see the glow. And as I'm looking at the window, I started walking towards the window, and the glow slowly diminished and then disappeared.
What happened to your son during all this?
He was asleep during the whole thing, which surprised the heck out of me. I went and checked on him afterwards, and he was sound asleep. And then after this incident, I kept a close eye every night on things that were happening around the house to make sure something like that wasn't happening again, because at this point, as I said in my initial email to you, excuse my French, but I call them these little bastards, because if they ever come back, my intention was to do everything I could to get my hands around their necks.
After that night in 1977, did you ever have any vivid dreams that contain those same types of beings?
No. I did have a couple other incidences and dreams, but not regarding these two. I had a very vivid dream one night that I was walking down the street in a small town that I'd never seen. And I see people looking up in the sky standing on the corner. And as I get to the corner, I look up and I see the sky filled with these large black triangles. And I remember looking at them and having the same feeling of hair standing up in my arms and the back of my neck. And I was looking up at them. The realism of the dream is what made me remember it. I remember looking up at them and thinking and saying to the people around me, I know what they want. I know where to go. Follow me. And then I woke up.
Well, at an intuitive level, if you were speculating about what you think they want, what would you say?
I think they wanted to grab us and use us for something. I think they wanted to just grab us and get us out of there, but I didn't get a good feeling about it.
And as you say that, do you have any intuitive gut feeling about what the non-humans are going to do next on Earth?
George, in the next half hour, Mr. Jones is going to talk about his gut feeling for the future, which is quite fascinating because he is a very down-to-earth, left-brain engineer who has been left with this odd residue of a sense of things coming after this experience. But something else very interesting occurred. After I first talked to Mr. Jones, and he was referencing the Texas nurse's comparison of the alien skin to dark green tree bark. He said this sentence that you heard in this report, it was very rough or bumpy skin like you would see on a lizard. So I researched lizards, and I sent photographs of various types to Mr. Jones. And when he saw, because I didn't front-load anything, I just sent him photos. He said when he saw the green spiny lizard, he emailed back, yes, that is the skin. If I took a sample of the area in the middle of the lizard's back and put that skin on the non-human faces, that would be it, except darker green than the lizard, than the earth lizard, and it's like the outside color of an avocado. So in my Earth Files report right now that everybody can go and look at, I have placed photos of the green spiny lizard, a close-up on the back. And when you look at that close-up, you can imagine somebody saying in the dark, that looks like tree bark. You really can. But it is the bumpiness on the lizard. And you take it to the color of a ripe California avocado, and it is a really dark green, and the nurse had said a dark brownish green. Well, those photos in the Earth Files interview with the engineer provoked the Texas nurse to also email back again that when she saw that bumpy lizard skin and that dark avocado color, she said to me in the email, well, that's what I can see. That's what I was looking at, too. And that similarity between some tree bark and that lizard skin explains both of their being kind of excited about the idea of tree bark acne. And then when you look at the lizard's back, you can see exactly from both of their points of view now. So I'm explaining this so that people can go to Earth Files and they can see a lizard skin that now two people who have been up close with something that is humanoid shape with this strange bumpy lizard skin, you can see what they have identified as what they saw. And
he seems believable, doesn't he?
Oh, he absolutely. They both are. The nurse and this engineer are both extremely credible. And here is the other interesting thing about what the nurse emailed after reading the engineer's report. Quote, I too feel that this is just the beginning of something much bigger. Not sure what. Part of me feels like these beings serve as a warning, and yet I feel like it is a good warning, like when you warn your children not to do something, close quote. And in the next half hour, when you hear the engineer talking about some of the residue that has been left in his mind since 1977 and a period that he had later on with these strange dreams of these triangular craft, it is so interesting because I asked him if in his conscious life anywhere has he ever seen any of those dark triangles in the sky. And his conscious, very close, 2 to 3 feet away from the small domed craft in the backyard is a completely different other machine. And as far as he knows, he has not consciously seen the triangles in the sky. But he feels that this vivid dream that he had has left him with going beyond a dream to a true sense that he is expecting to see these dark triangles in the sky again for real. And what all of us have been asking for years now, who or what is in the triangles versus the discs versus the cylinders versus the ice cream cone shaped versus the discs that have the 3 balls on the bottom. And you can go on. And the triangles, I think, in most people's minds have long been associated with something that is going to have some kind of clout. The question is, whose clout, to what end? And in this next half hour, you will hear some very interesting comments from Mr. Jones.
You know, with Larry King retiring today, Linda, I think that's a loss for ufology. I do not believe that Piers Morgan is going to continue with that.
Well, at least we've got Ancient Aliens.
We've got Ancient Aliens.
Yeah,
that's right.
They're on every Thursday night in the second season, and they're doing well. So hopefully there will be a third season in 2011, and the more we can put on the History Channel, the better.
More with Linda Bolton Howard in just a moment on Coast to Coast AM.